Stupid conspiracy theorist is now too simplistic. Martin North, John Adams, how dare you?
How dare you, Martin? Thing is that it's now come time again in 2022, just like it was in 2019. The high priest of the Australian political and bureaucratic system has now said, how dare Adams and North make comments about public policy and about the performance of government, because they have no idea what they're talking about. So in 2019, when we were attacking the cash ban and we said it had nothing to do with the black economy and it had everything to do with the IMF and monetary policy and negative interest rates and all that sort of things, what did Treasury say? Out of scope. These people have no idea what they're talking about. Aaron Patrick said, we're conspiracy theorists. Ignore these people. And then obviously when I went to testify in January 2020, Mr. Patrick was in the audience. And again, it says it's easy to come up with a hypothetical conspiracy theory because you don't have to prove it. So this is why Adams shouldn't be trusted. And yet only in the last 24 hours has now ASIC been... has made reference to the Adams report. So the ASIC was before the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Economics. And what do they say? Too simplistic. So we're going to get into that, and there's a lot of things to break about ASIC. But again, so how dare this Adams person write a report about us? We're on $400,000 a year, and the chairman's up almost to $1 million a year. We know what we're doing. We're the experts. And for some renegade and Wollongong to write a report about us and issue it to the media, his too low-level blue-collar pleb to be able to comment about us, and that's why his work is too simplistic, even though it's accurate, and even though they didn't say he didn't make any mistakes.
No, get back in your box, John.
Absolutely. So it doesn't matter what topic we wish to talk about into the future, Martin. The people around the country, particularly in capital cities, are going to be looking at us and saying, "Hey, well, how dare these people, make any public comments about affairs that have nothing to do with them, or it's none of their business."
No, and I'll just give you a parallel example, because APRA was actually up in that same afternoon, right? And Wayne Byers was basically saying, well, we don't have detailed analysis of which households and where and how, are in difficulty, right? And I'm thinking, well, there are people who know this stuff, right? It's just that somehow if you're not in the sort of, in the set, then you don't count.
Absolutely. Now, on to a little bit more serious matters, yep. Martin. So one of the big things I can reveal to the audience is that, it's now Wednesday, and we released the Adams report on Thursday last week. One of the amazing things, Martin, is I have had numerous communications over the last week, emails and phone calls, all sorts of horror stories about people who have lost money, people who have gone after certain people, and people who have dealt with ASIC. And there are lots of examples beyond some of the things that I've cited in my report about how people have dealt with ASIC, and they feel that ASIC has not done the appropriate job. Or they've been too light on, or they've just completely ignored them. And dare I say, I'm more resolute today compared to last week about the need for an inquiry, because what an inquiry would help do is all of these failings, all of these case studies, they will come out from these dark corners in this country, and you're going to see horror story after horror story of where ASIC has failed to properly assess these reports of alleged misconduct, and again, so obviously these allegations that people are putting forward have to be tested and done in the proper way. But when you get, for example, someone calling me on Saturday saying that there's $100 million Ponzi scheme that someone has been investigating for 2.5 years, and they went to ASIC, and the only thing that ASIC would do with them is to issue a individual with a 4-year ban, but won't even touch the systemic fraud elements of their allegations. I mean, we're getting into very serious stuff, and just to highlight a point that we were talking about off camera, because a number of people said, well, what happened to the in terms of the debt bubble, the property bubble, and the monetary policy things that we typically talk about? Well, the important reason why ASIC and this whole topic of financial crime is important is that when you have a bubble, ultra low interest rates, and you have speculation, you have people putting their money in all sorts of investment vehicles which are risky. And in a number of cases, some of those investment vehicles are genuine frauds, but you don't know until the bubble pops or until interest rates go up and the tide goes out. So we are in an environment now where there's a whole host of people across the country who have put money in various avenues, thinking that these are legitimate investments and that they're securing the financial future. And if, for example, just say for Trio Capital or Bernie Madoff or some of the other things, until a financial crisis, until it occurs, you don't know what are the real investments and what are the criminal frauds until it is fully exposed. So obviously, we've been warning about monetary policy risks and all those in terms of those systemic financial system risks that people need to be aware of, and we'll obviously get back to those topics in due course. But you do need an effective financial police force that's going to ensure that whether it's a normal economy or a hyper bubble, that fraud is kept at a minimum, so that you don't have a huge financial loss and devastation because people have been sucked into something thinking it was a great deal. Because obviously, anytime there's a boom, people get greedy, people want to make money, people will think this is a great offer. They go into thinking, they don't do their proper due diligence checks, and then it's only when the tide goes out that everything starts to fall apart. And obviously, if you've got a crap regulator or a poor financial police force, that's when those issues become more pronounced. And that's obviously what we're trying to highlight, is that with ASIC's own performance and numbers, they're getting worse at their job, not better. And that in an environment with rising interest rates, it's a very dangerous cocktail.
Yeah, I think, John, a lot of people keep saying to me, we shouldn't have any regulation at all. It should be a free market. But the truth is, for a market to work effectively, you've got to have the right cops on the beat to make sure that people are actually working within the system. And particularly over the last 2 or 3 years, with so many asset bubbles, it's quite true to think that there will be people who are going to get caught out, but they won't know until things fall over, by which time it's way too late.
Indeed. Now, before we get... So what we're going to do in this show, Martin, is that we're going to play a few clips from what was discussed yesterday between the House of Representatives Committee and ASIC. But before we do, we just want to highlight in terms of... just to show how dystopian this whole scenario is of what we're saying based on ASIC's own numbers versus what they tell Parliament is. So why don't we just go back to some of our previous work about what is ASIC's performance. So if we go to slide 1, Martin, again, this is financial year 2021. Basically, what I've calculated based on ASIC's own financial annual report is that they received over 14,800 reports of alleged misconduct. They only commenced 110 official investigations as per Section 13 of the ASIC Act or Section 247 of the National Consumer Credit Protection Act, which resulted in only 0.74% in terms of investigations to report of alleged misconduct. So again, when the media came out last week and said that there's a less than Adams alleges that the chance of an official investigation is less than 1%, well, that's where we get that number from. So if we go on to slide 2. And again, we'll run through this quickly. We see that the no further action rate on reports of alleged misconduct from the public went from 33% to 65% over the decade that I examined. If we look at breach reports, a decade ago it was 50% no further action, then it went all the way up to 89%. When we look at the disclosures from whistleblowers that result in no further action, since July 2015, the rate of no further action has been 91%. When you look at the number of actual new investigations per year, it peaked in financial year 14-15 at 229, and it fell to a low of 110. So you're going to hear some very interesting things from ASIC, but their own numbers are saying that they are doing fewer investigations, and these are No one has said that these are the wrong numbers because these are the numbers from their annual report. So when you look at the rate of investigations relative to the number of reports of alleged misconduct, we were at 1.9% in 14-15, down to 0.74%. So these are the major facts from my report, and these are the things that I've basically said, because it's not just about a point in time assessment, Martin. It's about the trend.
Yep.
And the trend is saying something is wrong at this agency, even though they have more money and more staff. These things are happening according to their own numbers, and you don't have to necessarily be a expert in financial investigation of criminal investigation or anything like that. This is just some simple maths, just taking some numbers from their own reports, putting in a spreadsheet, making some simple graphs, and then obviously doing some simple calculations. So I was accused of being simplistic, but obviously it's a very simple thing to do, to just demonstrate using their own numbers, some simple trends. And those simple trends, as they say, a picture says 1,000 words.
Yeah, and it's just worth underscoring, John, isn't it, that when they are actually talking, and we'll see this in a second, they sort of started from halfway down the journey of complaints. So basically they started with a smaller number because they'd already discarded a whole bunch of ones that you counted, right? So it goes to show that you can actually make numbers do different things just by the assumptions you apply when you start counting.
Yes, indeed. So Martin, I just want to start with the first clip. So the first clip is the opening statement from the chairman of ASIC, Joseph Longo, where he talks about a high level comment about their enforcement activities. So let's play that clip.
Our regular enforcement work continues at high volume. It is informed by reports from the public, external administrators, auditors, other government agencies, media reports and breach reporting, as well as our own intelligence and surveillance activity. One of these inputs, reports of misconduct from the public, usually number around 10,000 each year. We triage and prioritise these reports using criteria informed by our strategic priorities and other matters to select those that will be subject to further consideration. Given ASIC's finite resources, choices always have to be made about which of the many matters drawn to our attention can be pursued. Our challenge is to allocate our resources for maximum public benefit to consumers, as well as more broadly ensuring the proper conduct of markets and industry.
Yep, well, there you go. No problem.
Obviously, no problem. No reference to me in that clip. But what did he say? He says there's a high volume of enforcement.
No.
Now, our assertion, based on their own numbers, is there's a declining volume of enforcement because the numbers are saying they're doing fewer investigations per year. So for the chairman to say to Parliament there is a high volume of activity and yet their own annual report, unless if the annual reports are wrong, and then we can get ASIC for basically breaching their own obligations under various acts for misleading, deceptive conduct in their annual reports. But assuming the numbers are the numbers, they are doing fewer investigations, and yet his opening salvo to Parliament is there's a high volume of enforcement. Well, that doesn't gel in terms of the facts that we've been trying to present in the course of these series of shows, but also in the Adams report.
Absolutely. Well, numbers do tell a story.
Indeed. Now, later on, the ASIC was before the committee for 2 hours, and so we just played the opening clip from the opening section. Now, one of the amazing things, Martin, and again, so we really haven't got into the whole debate about climate change, but of all the things that are happening in the financial system and all the potential scandals that are out there, the committee spent 45 minutes on the point of greenwashing. And so greenwashing is this concept of companies or financial institutions or managed investment funds or whoever making exaggerated claims about their green credentials. So if you want to invest your money in an initiative that's going to reduce carbon emissions or to have a positive environmental impact, basically now you have ASIC as well as some of the other government agencies scrutinising the claims of the private sector because they're saying that the private sector is exaggerating their green credentials, and this is what they call greenwashing. Now, obviously, we don't want anyone in the market to lie. We want accurate and honest disclosure. But to spend 45 minutes on greenwashing of all the other things, I just thought this was an extraordinary conversation to have, given all the other issues that potentially could be that they could have talked about.
Well, I suppose two observations. One is there were quite a few new MPs in, right? And some of them came in on a sort of greenish platform, greenish tinge. But secondly, greenwashing is a nice, simple, comfortable thing to talk about, right? Because it doesn't actually directly impact ASIC, right? Much less likely that they want to going to touch on these hard issues about the performance of ASIC. This is a much easier thing to have a conversation about.
Yes, sure. So ASIC doesn't want to talk about ASIC. No. Look, we all agree on that. But the fact that the politicians were heavily focused on about greenwashing and how people are disclosing the use of credit offsets and all of this sort of stuff, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I mean, we've just seen on Four Corners only 6 weeks ago where people are on camera, a whistleblower saying, I was a fraudster, I went to ASIC, I could have given ASIC all the evidence possible and I didn't get a phone call or an email. You would have thought that would be of the highest order because that just shows systemic failure at ASIC. And yet the politicians are asking about green credentials. I just was stunned. And not only was I stunned, there was a number of people watching this testimony across the country and we were all thinking, is this the Truman Show? What the hell are we watching here?
Well, it was filling the air, wasn't it? It was taking the time, but was it the most productive use of time? And as you say, is this really the most critical issue that they should be wrestling with at the moment? Maybe part of the issue, John, is that many of the politicians won't necessarily have a very good understanding of the complexities of the financial system and some of the broader issues. So in a way, this is a comfortable area to be involved in. I don't know.
That potentially could be the case. Now, we're going to move on to clip 2. Now, clip 2 is the new member for Hasluck, who's from Labor. Her name's Tanya Lawrence. Now, she is one of the MPs that I wrote to with the Adams report, and she actually mentioned my name. So this is probably the 6th or 7th time I've been named in Parliament in the last decade. But she did name the Adams report. But she did ask about ASIC's approach to enforcement, and there was some discussion about enforceable undertakings. So how about we play this clip so that we can actually get a feel for how both the chairman as well as the deputy chair talk about their enforcement priorities.
And this is something Sarah Court can discuss in greater detail. As I said in my opening remarks, there are many more matters that we could possibly take on for investigation than we can take on. So one of our big challenges is case selection, is stepping back and saying we know there are all these problems, but which ones are we going to that are so significant and impactful that they require attention. So we have to prioritise. So that's our first challenge, figuring out, well, what problem do we seek to solve? What is the impact we're seeking to achieve? How are we going to achieve it? We have this broad regulatory toolkit. A lot of what we achieve is through regulatory guidance, through reports, through engaging with industry. But a big chunk of what we do is enforcement, where we say, well, you've done the wrong thing, or we think you've done the wrong thing, and here's the action we plan to take to deal with that. And it's at that end of the spectrum where we look at the merits. I think it's a point you're just making with respect. In the most serious situations, we will refer those matters to the DPP for criminal prosecution. If the misconduct doesn't rise to that level of seriousness, well, then there's a whole range of other outcomes. I'll call them non-criminal, but they're quite a range that we can take. I'll pause there. I'm just wondering whether Deputy Chair Cole wanted to add to that, or we want to have a follow-up question.
Probably will. Well, the only other thing I'd add to that answer, Ms Lawrence, is we do have an enforcement policy or document. I think off the top of my head, I was just trying to find it earlier, it's our regulatory guide number 151, but someone will no doubt jump up from behind me if I've got that incorrect. But in a sense, there is In any event, we can find the right number for you, Ms Lawrence, but the point of my intervention was just to say that document does set out the range of factors that ASIC will take into account when considering what is an appropriate enforcement response. And so some of the things that we will look at when making a decision, do we institute civil penalty proceedings, do we accept an enforceable undertaking, do we issue an infringement notice, are things like the harm to consumers or investors, the size of the entity engaging in the conduct, whether vulnerable consumers have been particularly impacted by the misconduct, the likelihood of it becoming an emerging industry-wide issue that we need to be to act on and be seen to act on quickly. So there are a range of things that we do take into an account. So the committee that I chair, the enforcement committee that Mr Longo referred to, when matters come up to the committee with recommendations from the investigators, we work through and think about those various issues and what we think, is this conduct so egregious that it should be dealt with in on a criminal basis and referred to the CDPP for a prosecution of the individuals involved? Should it go to a civil penalty proceeding in a federal court or Supreme Court? Is an enforceable undertaking the right outcome here? And as Mr Longo said, we have not used them frequently in the last year or two, but I think my own personal view is they do have a role to play in the right matters. Then we have the option of infringement notices, referring matters to ASIC delegates for banning, for example, so that someone can no longer provide financial advice. So there are a full suite of enforcement or regulatory tools that are available, and part of the job of the regulator is to turn our minds and use our discretion to know what is the right enforcement response in the face of particular misconduct.
Thank you, and I appreciate the detailed response because I know that you're receiving a lot of public criticism in the self-named John Adams review is one, and not so long ago with the Grey Wolf, where Stuart Roberts came out and said, in fact, he felt that the matter should have been investigated. So I do appreciate the detailed response and appreciate the 10,000 claims that you opened with. It's not an easy task.
Well, that was pretty bland, wasn't it?
It was pretty bland, Martin, but can I say there was a number of really interesting things that I took from the clip, which is, I think Chairman Longo actually hit the nail on the head, which is one of the most important things is case selection. Yep. Which cases get selected for investigation and which cases doesn't. Now, my case got selected for investigation, but there's a whole host of other cases that fall through the cracks. And obviously the problem is, the ones like, for example, Sterling or the Wolf of Woi, etc., is the ones that fall through the cracks. They're the ones that, if ASIC doesn't actually get a handle of those particular cases, that's where you get the horror stories going on national TV or in the news, and that's where you see more and more victims coming out. So yeah, case selection is very important, but also there's no transparency about how they select these cases. So part of the ASIC's aura is they operate in secrecy, and they make these decisions behind closed doors because obviously they're a law enforcement body and they need to ensure that evidence or cases or parties are not prejudiced, etc. So there's all these legal concepts that they use as a defence to say this is why we can't tell you. But then we have no transparency as to, well, are they selecting the right cases? Are they selecting the wrong cases? And then obviously, if they are selecting the cases and they do go ahead and have a look, well, how do we know they're making the right decision about the regulatory response? Is it because they talked about guidance? Should it be guidance? Should it be an investigation? And then if it is an investigation, should it be referred to the DPP? Should it be an enforceable undertaking or a civil penalty, etc.? So we are entrusting this agency that has a bad track record for a decade, smashed to the Royal Commission, smashed in 2014 by the Senate Economics References Committee, and these are the people who make these, who have enormous discretion to make these calls, and yet there is little transparency. But not only is there little transparency, Martin, there's little tough questioning by Parliament as to, well, how do we know you're making the right decisions? And obviously, the other obviously important point is that while they talked about the process of what they go through, no commentary about these trends in their own annual reports, and why is ASIC performing the way they do. I mean, Tanya Lawrence at the end basically said, well, you've got a tough job to do, and you've received some public criticism by John Adams and in terms of other people. I think that criticism is warranted, and yet I was somewhat, while I was named, I was somewhat, disappointed that there was not sort of more forensic questioning, because again, so I can reveal that, and we're going to show the next individual who I did meet on the 8th of September, Warren Day, the Chief Operating Officer. I asked these people point blank, and these people are on $400,000 a year, what is driving these trends at ASIC? I could not get an answer out of them. So the fact that if they can't answer me in private, well, if they're hard pressed in Parliament, well, surely I think the Parliament would realise that things are happening at this agency that the leadership doesn't have full control over.
Well, I mean, it's just a very, very important question, and it's disappointing that they didn't particularly want to go there. I'll also make another point, and it was, I think, in one of the earlier conversations where they said, well, quite a few of the complaints that go in, they just direct them to the Ombudsman or somebody else, right? So they just sort of do a flick pass. And we know how effective those Ombudsman-type resolution things aren't, don't we?
Yes, but here's the thing. So where there are matters which are not in terms of that are not in the jurisdiction of the regulator, we talk about that in the Adams report. I mean, so I don't have the precise numbers in front of me, but it was like about 9% a decade ago. Now it's only about 2 or 3%. Yep, so again, so ASIC is better at ensuring that they don't get those reports that shouldn't belong to them. But again, the trends that show that this is a very small part of their problem, and this is the problem with these ASIC officials that have been there for 2-3 decades, is they have well scripted answers that they just roll out in Parliament. And if people understand the detail, they would realise that they're being sort of sold a lemon. They're being told, okay, focus on this, and yet the real problem is in terms of over here. And we saw this on full display in terms of yesterday. Yeah,
it's called misdirection, John, isn't it? Don't look over there. Look over there.
Exactly. Now we're going to get on to in terms of the third clip where now there was a discussion about the use of data, the sources of information that ASIC relies upon to make these calls about investigations, enforcement, etc. And then there was some commentary about my report. While Mr. Day didn't mention me directly, there was a reference, and I got a quick email from you yesterday, like live as well, in which you highlighted the phrase that this type of analysis is simplistic.
Yes.
So how about we play that clip?
Also, I think, as I said, was your question was the idea of a review. Do we go back and reconsider? I don't think your question's asking, do we reconsider our position? There are times when we do. But it's also about what are the lessons learned, if you like, from our handling of it, and will we go back? And that does happen from time to time, certainly on some of the more high-profile things. So I think you can safely say that in relation to Sterling, there's things about, are there things that would have been identified earlier that we could look at and things like that. I could name a number of other matters over the last 10, 15 years that I've been involved in this type of space where that's happened as well. So there's always those types of things, because we know that it's not a perfect system, it's a human system, and we have to do reviews of that. What the chair's pointing to is, we're also beefing up our approach to the data points that we've got in this space. So certainly in our market space, we've got real-time data, obviously what's happening in the markets, and what we do get a number of what we call reports of misconduct from the public about, say, insider trading or market manipulation. What we find is, by the time we get that from the public, our markets team are already aware of what's going on there and have already made a decision whether or not there's something to look at or not. If you look at the other parts of our business or the other parts of our areas of regulation, such as financial services and credit, reportable situations, breach reporting's been mentioned. Soon we will get data direct from licensees, so their own internal, what they call internal disputes and complaints. But that's a lag indicator as well. It's not happening in real time, it's happening after the event occurred. So, but we will start to be able to triangulate that alongside the breach reporting data, alongside liquidator data, auditor data, financial statements that are lodged. So that's an area that we really are looking to beef up our approach. What that does mean that we'll also take into account the sort of piece of information we get from the public, and they're not all tip-offs of the highest order. A lot of the times they're just people who just want help because they don't know who to speak to and they don't know how to what should they do. They just need help. So a perfect example happens in financial advice all the time. People say, I think I've got really bad advice, what do I do? And generally in those matters, and that makes up a big volume of what comes to us, we send them to the Australian Financial Complaints Authority, the Ombudsman scheme, because that's where it should go. So this is why these analyses that quite frankly are very simplistic about the reports we get are really, slightly misdirected if not misconceived, because there's a whole lot of things going on in that the sets of contacts we get from the general public. There's a whole range of things, and I can talk about that for hours if I needed to.
I appreciate that, though. Thank you. And it's not an easy task from the outset that you are confronted with, and it's a matter of making the right decisions, and I guess just as you say, doing your best to communicate that outwards.
Well, John, I would say that the answer was simplistic.
But potentially the answer could be simplistic, but again, very, very high level, very, very vague. And here's the thing, Martin, is that obviously my report from last week, the 71 pages, was based on public information. Now, obviously ASIC would have a whole host of information that I'm not aware of and I'm not privy to because it's not in the public domain. So if there is more complexity around these topics, two things. Let ASIC explain that complexity, number one, so that the public actually has a better understanding of this. But two, this is why I think the inquiry is useful, because ASIC has a story to tell, and now Mr. Day says there's more complexity, and there's more complexity behind these simple trends. So let ASIC bring their story to Parliament, and obviously we're going to hear all these horror stories that people have been calling and emailing me over the last week, telling me their horror stories with ASIC, and let those stories come forward. And obviously, if it's all on the table, then we'll see who's more closer to the truth. Now, and this is really important, Martin, is that in the last decade, there's been at least 2 in-depth assessments of ASIC, and there was one big one in 2015 that Frydenberg, as the Assistant Treasurer, commissioned. And what this review found, this capability review of ASIC, found that there is a stark difference in how ASIC's leadership thinks about ASIC versus external stakeholders. So we talk about this in terms of the Adams report. So this issue of people at ASIC living in the ivory tower, and they think everything is fantastic, and yet everyone outside of ASIC thinks something's really wrong. That phenomena, that this cultural dichotomy is still going on. And this is why I think an inquiry is important, because I don't think some of these people at ASIC fully comprehend how the public at large view them and their performance. And I think that was on full display yesterday as well.
Yeah, I agree with that, John. I'd also make the point that they didn't dispute any of the figures that were being thrown around, right?
Well, precisely. So we'll get on to the implications. What are the implications from these clips? The first one is that, like you say, they didn't say the report was wrong. And here's why this is important. If we can all agree that the numbers are the numbers and the facts are the facts, it's open. It's a matter of interpretation. It's not that Adams got it wrong. So, and obviously, this is, if I can be honest with the audience, this is why I was quite anxious last week, checking the numbers time and time again, just to make sure that there can be no claim that the calculations were wrong, or the source data was wrong, or the numbers in the report were wrong. So we all agree that the numbers and the trends that we've shown in this show, as in previous shows in this series, is all accurate. But the question is, well, why are these things happening? And so obviously, the public at large have an interpretation. ASIC has an interpretation. Some people already in Parliament have already got an interpretation. And not only did we see Senators Bragg from the Liberal Party and Senator Pratt last week express significant concern, and these concerns are long-standing. This week we saw Senator Roberts from One Nation who's been on the show previously about the cash ban, he's come out and said that we need an inquiry because of the Adams report. And Senator Roberts, obviously coming from Queensland, has heard about all sorts of horror stories of farmers, in particular in terms of the banks. And so while you saw some of these people in the House of Representatives who've just been elected and who are perhaps very new to the process of examining public officials and listening to these responses, some of these senators who've been around for 5 to 10 years, like Pratt, Bragg and Roberts, are well seasoned and actually understand what's going on. And obviously there's a very different view in the Senate compared to the House of Representatives. And so obviously the fact that there is no dispute about the numbers, there is no dispute about the integrity of the Adams report. They say simplistic. I say that they don't have a cogent explanation to explain why these things are happening. And obviously because of that, that's why I'm more convinced today compared to last week that we all need to push forward and actually ensure that as interest rates go up, as more fraud is exposed, because obviously if there are fraud schemes, and particularly if there are fraud schemes based on debt, or here's the other thing is that if there are individuals or companies who have investments and they are now in financial stress, mortgage stress, etc., well, how do they meet their cash flow obligations? They liquidate assets. And if it's a Ponzi scheme, like with Madoff, when there are too many redemptions, what happens? The Ponzi schemes basically collapse. So as rates go up, either frauds that have debt or investors that need to liquidate positions are going to expose some of these frauds in the market. And yet, if the financial cop is not actually aware of these issues and actually taking the appropriate aggressive action early, you're going to see more and more harm. And dare I say that if the RBA, now we'll get into this in a future post, I think the RBA will pivot and the RBA will start to soften its position vis-a-vis interest rates and the housing market. But if they don't, you are going to see a number of horror stories of investors in this country losing millions and millions of dollars of schemes that have happened for a long, long time. And everyone's going to say, well, where was ASIC during all this period where, because you only know ASIC's failures when the thing collapses. And so while we can talk about historical collapses, we know that there is financial crime happening today. There are schemes out there that have yet to fall over. And dare I say, if Philip Lowe doesn't pivot, there'll be more things that will fail this year and next year, and then the attention will go back on ASIC and saying, well, surely you should have known about some of these things. And dare I say, I think some of these reports of alleged misconduct that are resulting in no further action will come out to show that ASIC was told about some of these issues prior to a systemic collapse, and yet they did nothing about it.
Well, as Warren Buffett says, you can see who's swimming naked when the tide goes out, and the tide is certainly going out quite fast at the moment. So that's why this is such an important conversation. But I guess, John, as we come to the end of the show, the question then becomes, so what should we now be doing to keep the pressure on to make sure that we can actually drive towards this inquiry?
Absolutely. So the first thing that I would encourage people to do, Martin, is that, so now we showed my email last week. Let's put my email back on the screen. So a number of people from around the country and also around the world emailed me directly and said, give me the copy of the Adams report. So this is not proprietary information. We can share it to whoever we want. So if you would like to read the report and actually see with your own eyes, you know, my commentary, the data, all the references that we have in all the appendices, email me directly. I will share the report. You can read it yourself. And then obviously you can become educated about what's really happening in terms of ASIC. And then obviously what's really important is that while last week was good in terms of getting media attention, and this week we've had Senator Roberts come out on Monday talking about the need for an inquiry, ASIC before the House Committee. I know that there are some journalists writing some stories this week about ASIC between now and in terms of the weekend. But we've also seen in the last week, Martin, a number of our viewers and supporters across the country already making phone calls and emails, but also specific detailed emails to politicians saying, this is my story and this is why we support Adam's call for an inquiry. So the more people that can actually email politicians and say, we want an inquiry into ASIC. We want actually a detailed review, because the other thing is, Martin, this ASIC story, the Adams report, this is effectively an examination of the coalition's time and power, and it is a legacy of failure. And so it's refreshing that Senator Bragg, who's a Liberal, says, no, well, we failed on this, and we should be willing to address our own failures. So, but this is a big test for Labor. So Labor made all sorts of pronouncements before the election about how the coalition didn't want the Royal Commission to the banks, and how they're not serious about actually looking after vulnerable consumers, etc. So if Labor doesn't come through with an inquiry, well, then there's real question as to what is their real position about all these issues, as opposed to their pre-election public position. So we'll put the series of slides on the screen. So what I've done this week, Martin, is not just name the same politicians that we did last week, but also I've given on the slides the politicians' specific email addresses, and people should feel free to email some of these people or all of these people, and obviously refer to the Adams report. Obviously tell them that there's a need to have an inquiry and to look into the performance of our financial police, and make sure that as we go forward, as the global economy teeters into recession, as interest rates go up, as it's more likely that we're going to see more financial crime being exposed because schemes are going to fall over, that we actually have effective laws, but effective enforcement of those laws as well.
Absolutely, and that's, I think, worth saying that this is not actually simplistic at all, right? This is getting to the very heart of the critical issue that we need to explore in the interest of the people.
100%.
Well done, John. Keep it up, and we'll report back, see what happens over the next few days.
Thank you very much.
Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of the people. We'll see you next time.